I've been making mistakes, trying to cure a heartbreak, but it's all in vain. All up in my feelings, staring at the ceiling, trying to keep my heart on straight. If I could turn back time, would I say goodbye? Baby, would I let you go? Could you tell me why I keep switching sides? I don't really know, so please forgive my bipolar heart, baby. No medication can save me, save me.
Well, hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel, or if it's your first time here, welcome especially. I'm Sally, and I'm so glad you've stopped by. It has become a bit of a tradition for me to sit down around New Year's each year and just spend some time reflecting on what I have learned in the past year and my hopes and dreams, my goals for the upcoming year. So that's what I've done. I've sat down and just been reflecting on 2023, on what I've learned, and I want to share that with you today. I can say safely and without a doubt that 2023 was the craziest year of my life so far, definitely the most eventful year of my life so far. It was both tremendously blessed. A lot of really, really good stuff happened beyond my wildest dreams, but it was also really difficult, and there were some really treacherous moments, encountered some situations that were harder emotionally, I would say, than any situations I've encountered before. And it's really interesting to me looking back to see how both of those extremes can simultaneously exist. In the course of 1 year, my husband and I left our home in Wilmington, North Carolina. We sold just about everything we own. Well, all of our furniture, kept our other stuff, but sold all our furniture. We left Wilmington. We then thought it would be a great idea, before we had a permanent home, to go to Europe. We'd been planning this trip for like 2 years, ever since we got married. And we were supposed to be gone for 5 weeks. We ended up cutting it short because there was a lot going on and we were just ready to be home. And I'll get into some of that, or the lessons related, a little bit later. But in our just over 3 weeks, we went to Paris, we went to London and some areas just outside of London in the UK. We went to Switzerland. We stayed with a cousin in Zurich who was very, very gracious to have us. Took a little trip out to Lucerne, and it was a wonderful experience. But my husband was also having to work over full-time hours during that time. Multiple all-nighters were pulled during that trip, and not because we were out traveling during the day. And then he was working at night. It was because some things just like exploded all at one time. So we did that, and then we got back. We flew out to Iowa for my grandfather's memorial. We flew back to Tennessee to see his family. We'd seen my family before we went to Europe, and then after staying in Tennessee for a little bit, we drove all of our possessions, and I don't remember the dimensions, but some little trailer, across the country from Tennessee to Boise, Idaho. And yeah, we've been out there for the most part, but we have been bouncing around, haven't had a permanent address in like 6 months, which is kind of crazy and humbling. And I think it's been a very like healthy and good experience for me. So we've been out there. I got to go to Italy with my closest friends from college, and that trip was incredible. And then we launched Riza, my nutritional therapy practice, which required so many hours of work behind the scenes. And it was scary and fun and really exciting to see come together. And I wrote the starter guide, and oh yeah, I did my nutritional therapy program. So I started that and finished it. And then we've come back to North Carolina and Tennessee and been working and been all over the place. And okay, that took longer than I thought it would to say all of that. But I guess it just goes to show this has been a really big year. And you can hear it. Like, we've been so blessed at the opportunities we've had in this time. And I will not for a minute take that for granted. But what you don't plan for, I suppose, what you don't anticipate is how much of a struggle all of that change and uncertainty will be. And I think just overarching, I have like bullets down here on paper because I want to make sure I hit on them, but this might end up being a more fluid conversation than it is like listing off my bullets, because that just feels more natural. But But I think what's been really, really challenging and really good for me at the same time is not having a permanent home and having to separate my identity from that. I am someone who loves to have my own space. I love to be able to cultivate that space. The homemaker in me just craves that. And I think that's very normal. That's a very normal human thing. Dare I say, like, woman specific, even, not that men don't want to, but like, especially in the female psyche, I do believe there's some of that like extra ingrained. And I realized that especially when we actually were gone for the time that we were in Europe, in particular, traveling for that time, especially trying to work and travel at the same time, it was like, oh my goodness, it's hard not to have an actual home base to return to, like truly your space, your things. And just like throughout the year, thinking about using my dishes and using my blankets and all of that just became like more and more nostalgic seeming. Not to say that we weren't really enjoying where we were and really grateful for it, but it's just interesting. It's not something you think about. And yet in the 6 months that we have been all over the place, I have been really forced to come to a place of just acceptance and contentment in my circumstances in a way that I haven't been forced to do before. Realizing that I want to be present through all of this. I really want to enjoy it and not just focusing on getting to the next thing, which is something that is ingrained in me and has been a struggle throughout my lifetime. But I want to be able to let go, be present, soak up the moments, and yes, look forward to having a home again, and yes, look forward to planting roots, but not let that excitement dictate my attitude in the present. So that's been a huge thing for me, just letting go, separating my identity from this idea of like a home in terms of a physical place here on earth. And I think also it's making me even more excited. It's going to make it feel so good when we do get into our home, hopefully in just a couple weeks. Okay, so the first official bullet I have on my list is that no matter how well you plan it, no matter how good it looks on paper, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. This hit really hard when we got to Europe, when we got to Paris specifically. We'd been planning this trip for so long. We had been really looking forward to it, and we had been working really, really, really hard in the first 5 months of the year to get to the point where we could take this trip and where we could move. And in many ways, it looked like this bright light at the end of the tunnel where we were going to get to finally let go and just be and rest and stop like working so hard for the future and just like enjoy life. And we were so excited for this, and we were so exhausted. And then we get to Paris, and Paris is beautiful. I absolutely love Paris. I didn't expect to love it so much. But a nasty client situation happened with Samuel, and all of this work piled up because of it. And he had more work than he thought he would have to do anyway. But it was like, there was a work piece that was very stressful, very emotionally stressful. And then on top of that, I found out that I didn't know how to use Eurail, and we were supposed to go from Paris to the UK on Eurail. I didn't know that you have to get I knew you had to get seat reservations, but I didn't know that if you reserved a ticket, that didn't necessarily mean that there were seat reservations available. And so I'd reserved tickets, but when I went to get seat reservations, they were all full and there was no way for us to get them. And so we'd like spent all this money on our Euro passes, and we're like, oh my gosh, what are we supposed to do? We were able to get that resolved, thank God. Like, we got most of our money refunded, not all of it. And then we ended up having to buy EasyJet passes, or EasyJet plane tickets, there we go, and we flew over that way, and it was okay, but so stressful finding that out. Also so stressful with the client situation happening, and there was also a financial piece to that, and so then there was this is less efficient financially than we planned. It was just like all of this stuff that culminated, and then especially when there's a financial piece, I'll just admit, like, I'm especially wired to be like freaking out about that, which I think is another lesson for me, something I've been reflecting on the past year. But anyways, what was supposed to be this like relaxing, perfect time turned out to be really, really stressful and not at all perfect. And I think I kind of made it worse, at least for a little bit, by getting so irritated about it being stressful and it not being how it was supposed to be. And in retrospect, think that I, in a way, set myself up for failure just by having such high expectations kind of about that time and about how things were going to go. And it's just an example of like me needing to kind of loosen my control and realize I can't like put these certain events on a pedestal because life's going to happen and that's okay. But then the other part of it is the not letting the perfect get in the way of the good, not letting failure, rather, to achieve perfection or for things to be perfect or for me to even handle a situation perfectly or to be perfect, get in the way of me enjoying what is good and receiving it and recognizing that sometimes stuff happens and you just have to walk through it. And I was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine recently about something totally different, but she shared this quote, which is also the name of a book, which I would like to read, but I haven't read yet. It is called, and she said, "The obstacle is the way." We were talking about specifically like prayer and why different people have to deal with thorns in their side of different kinds, so to say, and why like even when you pray, they're not taken away, blah, 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 how all that works. But I think it applies to this situation as well. Like we are confronted with obstacles time and time again in our lives, and our tendency is to want to circumvent or to push them out of the way. But that's not how you really get where you're going. That's not how you get value out of life. That's not how you gain wisdom. That's not how you really truly gain experience. Oftentimes you just have to go through that obstacle, and there's a lot more to be had that way. And so I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know if this is coherent, but that's just what I've been thinking about. I haven't read the book, but I don't know. That resonated. Okay, I've been rambling enough about this, but next one is to trust in God's provision does not mean he will provide immediately or that he'll provide, in the way that you think he's going to provide, but that ultimately he will, and probably in ways you can't even imagine. But just kind of going back to the start of that, to trust in God's provision does not mean he will provide immediately. When we got to Boise after our travels and after some like financial stuff coming up, which was unexpected, we had, as I said earlier, made sure we had a buffer so that we could get settled and get our feet under us and not be completely frantic about it. But I learned very quickly, pretty much as soon as we didn't have more jobs lined up in the future, that, it's hard to do that. It's hard to chill not knowing essentially like where your next paycheck is going to come from. And I think in Boise, this really like reached its culmination where we were in church one day and pastor was talking about praying with, I think the word was like chutzpah, like how God wants us to pray is like you're a little kid coming up to your dad's pant leg and like tugging on his pant leg and saying like, Dad, I want this. Dad, I want this, like begging him for it. And like, that's how we should come to God, like unabashedly, unashamed. But at the same time, that doesn't mean God's going to answer any of our prayers. Like God will provide for us, and ask and you shall receive, but you have to ask in alignment with God's will. And a lot of what we're asking for is like him to actually align us with his will. That could be a whole thing. But the point is, I was feeling convicted about like how I pray. And I was reflecting on that. I was also reflecting on the fact that I was like nervous because we didn't really have work lined up. And so I just started to pray really unabashedly that like, God, give us a job. God, give us work to do. Give Samuel work to do. Give me something to do that can help, like all of this, and praying really boldly and trusting God in the process, but also being like, okay, he's going to provide for me. And be like, okay, when's it going to happen? And like doors would open and then they would like close. And I had a moment where we were going to the grocery store, and it's easy to like, for me, again, I was telling you, I tend to have like a closed fist mentality with some of these things. I'll want to be like, okay, we just like barely need to get anything. We're going to be as frugal as possible. If we don't exactly know like what the future is going to look like. But I had a moment where we were going to the grocery store and I was kind of feeling that way, like what's the absolute least we can get to survive? And I realized like it is not faithful for me to buy my groceries as if we're not going to have anything to buy groceries with down the road. And again, this is rambly. I hope that you guys are bearing with, but That's just not a faithful attitude to have. Like, obviously we should be wise and we should budget and we should adapt to the times and be frugal and all of that. But to like have such a closed fist mentality that you're afraid to get what you need to really eat good meals when the circumstances just aren't dictating that isn't faithful. And also in that same moment, I had this realization that, oh my goodness, like I might have to wait for a little bit. Like we might not have another job come up for a couple months, or I don't know how long, or maybe we're going to have to take a completely different path than we initially realized, but that's okay. And it was this notion of like, to really trust God to provide for me doesn't mean I just ask God to provide with like all of the boldness and as unabashedly as I can, and then he's going to provide. It means I have to actually sit in it. I actually have to trust that God is going to provide when it's not happening, when we can't see what the future looks like, when maybe we can't even see one step in front of us, or maybe we see the step in front of us, but we don't see the financial return on that. Anyway, that was really, really kind of like an aha moment for me, because it's easy to say, God, I trust you, but it's a lot harder to sit and wait and trust God in that moment, and trust that even if he took every single thing away from you, if he took your dreams and threw them down the drain, that what he has is better and more meaningful. And if you can walk and seek to align yourself with his will and with his purpose, that there will be more for you than you can ever imagine. And lo and behold, we have been provided for this year and after that time in ways I never imagined. Just some opportunities in terms of work for Samuel, in terms of a living situation coming up, in terms of how things fit together like puzzle pieces. He always comes through, and it's not to say he'll come through like that, but I don't know. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Moving on to the next is just kind of in that same vein, like every good thing really does come from him, and that I can't force anything to happen. In that same period of time, when we're trying to get settled in Boise, it's really easy to be like trying to get the ball rolling in so many different ways. Like you're trying to network, you're trying to set up, I don't know, like with videography for Samuel, we'd be trying to set up different relationships with clients and everything. And that's valuable. Like you need to do the work. But in me, it often feels like, or I'll think like, if I can just do X, Y, or Z, if this can be my output, then like it's going to have a return. But what I've been shown repeatedly in my life is like, I can grind as hard as I want to grind. But unless the Lord wills it, unless he hands it to me, like I can't make it happen. And again, like what he has to offer is so much better than anything that I could imagine or could force to happen myself. Second to last lesson on my list is that sometimes situations just suck. Sometimes people are just nasty, and I have to be okay with that and be able to move forwards. And I'm not going to go into details about any like specific situations just out of respect. But I just want to note that it's really, really difficult for me if something isn't fair, if I feel like I'm misunderstood, if it's like something is clearly unjust, to let that go. And there've just been a couple situations this year where I've really realized that it's not my job to essentially be the arbitrator of justice. Vengeance isn't mine. It wouldn't be good to make it mine. And I really, really struggle with like letting these things go and moving on with my life and not having like consistent emotional reactions to them. And so I would say this is something I'm still learning, but it's like things like that are just going to happen. You're going to get into situations that suck. You're not going to know why. You're not going to know why some people do the things they do. You're not going to be perfect in all situations. And even if you acknowledge that and do your best to like make things right, some people just don't care, and some people just don't operate that way. And you have to find a way to just move on and be okay with it. And something my dad said when I was going through a situation like this year that was really difficult was just like, you can't let their or somebody else's response, their upset, control your life like this or like affect your emotions so much. But I think it's difficult when talking about emotions. It's like, it's not something you can just switch on and off. And especially when you're angry, it's difficult to like let go of those things when a person is just like, when a situation is just so unfair. Yeah, so still learning this, but trying to do a better job of just letting go and trusting God to do his thing and to be utterly just and utterly fair, and that regardless of what that looks like, it's not my job to figure it out. So that is second to last. And then the last lesson on this list is that circumstances do matter. And this may seem a little bit interesting in the context of my first couple lessons, especially like what I was saying about learning how to be content without having a home. But I think it's kind of like a both and situation. We were, really grateful. We are really grateful for the time that we had living in Wilmington, really grateful for our community there. The whole time that we were living there, though, we just knew like this isn't where we want to be long term. And there were aspects of like the weather and aspects of just like culture in the town and what we had access to that we were really discontent with. And I actually had a lot of fear in my heart leaving Wilmington that this was just all like contentment. These were all contentment issues on my heart, and that leaving and going anywhere else, even if it was like the best place we could imagine with like exactly what we want, that if I couldn't be, content there, that I wasn't going to be able to be content anywhere. And that's so true. Like, again, you have to own up to your own contentedness. But I also realized when we got to Boise and we realized how much we love it and how we just feel better because of the weather, because of the access to nature, because of the things around, because of the shared like community values, because of the food that like there's access to, it was like, oh, those were legitimate preferences, concerns, and it's like changing our circumstances in this way really did enhance our day-to-day quality of life. And so I guess the overall takeaway from that to me is to be content, to learn to be content and in a sense accept where you're at, acknowledge that, and make the best of your circumstances, but also not to be complacent. Contentment and complacency are not the same thing. Not to be complacent if you're truly like unhappy in a situation, or if there's something that you're seeking after, a dream you have, whatever it may be willing to do the hard work, chase after that dream, recognize that your life isn't going to just be magically better when you get there, that any problems you really have going into it are still going to be there, but that at the same time, circumstances do matter. And if there's a problem like with your circumstances and there's anything you can do to change it, then take ownership of that as well and do it. So that's it for today. I know I have talked and talked and talked. This is probably going to be a long video, so if you're still here, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm really excited for 2024 and everything that's coming up, and I'm really excited just to see kind of where this community goes in different ways. And yeah, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, bye y'all.
Vacation can't save me. So back and forth lately, keeping you waiting. Please forgive my